Psalm 34 is a psalm of thanksgiving, and it had a very specific context out of which it came. It is the occasion when David feigned insanity before Abimelech. And so we can get an idea of exactly what was in David's mind when he was writing this psalm. It's a psalm of personal testimony, of thanksgiving for God's miraculous deliverance when David was rather desperate. You can see the context there in the superscription. It's of David when he changed his behavior before Abimelech, and so that he drove him out and he went away. Now, David, in this context, is on the run from Saul, and it must have been pretty desperate because David sought refuge in the city where Abimelech was king, and that would be a Philistine city. Now, David had horrible relationships with the Philistines, right? He comes on the scene by killing their champion, Goliath. The song goes that David had killed his tens of thousands. Most likely, most of those were Philistines. David had a lot of bad run-ins with the Philistines, and so things must have gotten pretty bad for David to seek refuge in their capital city. Abimelech is the king. And so I believe what happened here was David thought, if I stay where I'm at, I'm going to be killed. Saul is going to capture me, so my only option is to seek refuge in the city of my enemy. And so I can avoid being killed there, I will pretend to be insane. And they'll not kill me, because if they kill me, then, that's that. I'm done. But if I'm crazy, that means they can make fun of me. They can mock me. They can ridicule me. They can do bad things to me. But at least they won't kill me, because it's more dishonorable if they keep me alive so that they can shame me and so they can demonstrate their perhaps a sense of justice, that their God came through after all, because look what happened to the guy that killed our Goliath. That's my guess. And David's plan worked. He was sheltered for a time there until he was driven away and on the run again. And so out of that experience, David writes a wonderful acrostic psalm of praise and trust. Now, it begins with praise. And as I said, it is an acrostic, so it is based on the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Each verse starts with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet from Aleph to Tav. One thing about this psalm is that it contains a lot of references to body parts, my mouth, my soul, faces, and so I'm going to note those throughout, and you'll see that this is one of the characteristics of this particular psalm. Another common refrain in this psalm is reference to David's fears. You've delivered me from my fears. And as an alternative to that, David says, I fear you, and he'll describe those who fear you. So those who respect, those who worship, those who honor God. He's asking us, by implication here, to turn your fears of things that could happen to you in this world to fear and trust in the one who can deliver you from those, that is, Yahweh. Now, verse 7 reminds me of the story in 2 Kings chapter 6. This is when Elisha the prophet is aged and he is blind, and he receives word from his servant that the city in which he is staying is now surrounded by the Syrian army. And the servant is upset by this, and Elisha responds, "Don't be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And the servant at that point must have said, "Wait a minute, there's only two of us, and there's a whole army out there." And then Elisha prayed and said, "Oh Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." Do you catch the irony there? Elisha is the one that's blind. And he prays that the Lord would open his servant's eyes, the seeing one. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And at that moment, the Syrian army is struck with blindness, and they are captured, and the victory of God is seen here. And I can't help but think of verse 7, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him. Elisha would have known this psalm, the Psalm of David, would have known David's experience. And when Elisha prays, I'm sure he had this psalm in mind and could visualize the chariots of fire, the horsemen of the army of God surrounding them and delivering them. The second movement of the psalm moves into invitation to wisdom. "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good," that is, to experience his goodness. We have a mockerism in verse 8, "Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints. Those who fear him have no lack. Lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come and listen. I'll teach you the fear of the Lord." And here's the wisdom: keep your tongue from evil, your lips from speaking deceit. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. These words are picked up by Peter when he writes to the early Christians who were enduring suffering unjustly. He says, don't repay evil for evil. Instead, bless instead of curse, and you'll obtain a blessing. Then he quotes extensively from this section of the psalm, including verse 15 to follow. And he says, if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. So have no fear of them, nor be troubled. It's clear that Peter was familiar with the psalm as well, as he quotes the midsection of it as well, would draw his readers and us to this wonderful psalm of trust, even when we're in the most desperate of situations. Again, noting the body parts here: the eyes of the Lord, his ears are attentive to their cry. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil. The nearness of the Lord to the broken heart. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. What a wonderful promise verse 18 is to us. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. He keeps all his bones, another body part. Not one of them will be broken. Now, this is an interesting quotation. The New Testament quotes this in reference to Jesus on the cross. The custom was that there were not to be any bodies remaining on the cross for the Sabbath. Jesus was crucified on a Friday, and so afternoon of Friday, bodies need to be removed from the cross and taken for burial. And there were a couple, those that were crucified on his left and right, were not dead yet, and so their bones were broken, their legs were broken, so they would expire more quickly. It was determined that Jesus was already dead, so they did not break his legs. Instead, they pierced his side. Out came water and blood. This was evidence of death. And those who saw it are witnesses of this. John emphasizes the importance of this, that Jesus was indeed dead, and that this happened so that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. This is the scripture he's talking about, Psalm 34:20. And again, they'll look on the one they have pierced. And they did that because he had already died. No need to break his bone. So fascinating fulfillment of that psalm. Verse 21, affliction will slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. This is maybe a little difficult to understand, but I think the second line of this verse helps us with that. Those who hate the righteous will be condemned. It's a statement of justice, that there is punishment, there's justice, there's condemnation that comes from those who cause evil and harm on the righteous, and that affliction will slay them. Whatever they do will come back to get them. This is a frequent theme in the Psalms, that there is a recoil. Whatever you do negatively will come back, and you'll be justly punished for it. That theme of justice is a solid one in the Psalms. As we look at this psalm in the lens of the editor, we can see that this psalm is the final psalm in the third chiasm of Book 1. We had the first 14 psalms, and then the next 10 psalms, and now this group of 10 psalms will be our third chiasm. And so we would correspond Psalm 25 with Psalm 34. And what's interesting, they are both acrostics, and they both omit the letter Vav. Now that's the letter V, and there are not that many words in the Hebrew language that start with that, and so it was omitted. And instead, they insert a final verse that begins with Pei. So both of these psalms have the same form, Psalms 25 and Psalm 34. And so that suggests a frame that these psalms form of these 10 psalms, and that would cause some correspondence. Innocence, Psalm 26, to guilt in 32. Trust psalms, 27 and 31, which have several similar phrases. Psalm 28, this lament, hear my cry, might correspond to Psalm 30. Thank you for answering my prayer. You can see that correspondence. Innocence, guilt, trust, hear my cry, thanks. Leaving Psalm 29 as the chiastic center of this psalm, this great hymn that anchors the psalmist around the truth that God is sovereign even over the storms of life and the flood. And so to have the psalm here in the middle, you'd want to have an odd number of psalms, right? But we don't have that. We have an even number. We have 10. And so I believe the editor inserted Psalm 33. It's the only psalm in this section that is not a Davidic psalm, and it's only one of 2 psalms in the first book of Psalms that is not a Davidic psalm. So think it's very likely that this was inserted. And remember that this Psalm 33 had 22 verses, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, just like Psalm 25 and Psalm 34. So this chiasm seems to be framed by the chiastic structure of the psalm by the Hebrew alphabet. This psalm, of course, reminds me of a song, as every psalm seems to do. In this case, it's the classic Blessed Be the Name of the Lord by Matt and Beth Redman, a song that was written in 2002, soon after the terrorist attacks in September 11 of 2001. And as a nation, we were rocked and unsettled by all of these events. And this song came along at a time that reminded us that we are to bless the name of the Lord at all times, that his praise should continually be on our lips in good times and in bad, in desperate situations and in good. So take a moment and sing this song as we reflect on how God encamps around those who fear him and delivers them.